Chapter 1. The Legacy of Chains. The old Karamazov estate loomed against the bruised sky like a wound that refused to heal. Its black stones, slick with centuries of rain and decay, rose in cruel angles over the tundra's skeletal landscape. Wind howled against the iron gates, their twisted filigree rusted and bent into grotesque shapes that whispered as they swayed. Alexei Karamazov was the first to arrive, his boots crunching over the frozen gravel. He pulled his threadbare coat tighter around him, his face pale and set with a solemn purpose. His breath misted before him in frantic clouds, as though even the air resisted entering the house. Above the door hung a tarnished iron crest, a cracked shackle encircling an open eye. The family symbol, an inheritance more ancient and more terrible than even the Karamazov bloodline could bear. Inside, the house smelled of wet stone, mildew, and something fouler, something living. Alexei felt it immediately, a pressure, like unseen fingers pressing against his temples. The air pulsed in waves, thick and oily. The summons had been simple. A letter, unsigned, commanding the sons to return home after their father's death. No condolences, no explanations. Only a date and a time, written in an uneven hand that seemed to shake even the ink into madness. Footsteps echoed down the cracked marble hall. Dmitri came next, a bottle swinging loosely from one hand, his coat undone despite the cold. His face was already flushed, eyes bloodshot from travel and drink. He smiled when he saw Alexei, but the smile was sharp, almost mocking. "You made it," Dmitri said, tossing the bottle into a corner where it shattered against the wall with a glassy shriek. "Our father's corpse won't bury itself, will it?" Before Alexei could answer, the final brother arrived. Ivan, wrapped in a dark woolen coat, his hair slicked back from his pale, angular face. His expression was unreadable, cold, analytical. Where Dmitri exuded a raw, violent heat, Ivan was a void, drawing all warmth into himself. No words were exchanged. There were none left. The house swallowed them as it had swallowed generations before. At the heart of the estate, past rotted tapestries and flayed portraits, stood the library. A cavernous room with books stacked to the rafters, the smell of mold and charred leather thick in the air. In the center of the room was a coffin. It was not polished or grand, merely a pine box, nailed shut, stained dark where fluids had seeped through. On top of it lay an old iron key, grotesquely oversized and blackened with age. Alexei moved first, picking up the key with a tremulous hand. It was heavier than it had any right to be, the metal radiating a steady, sickly heat into his flesh. Pinned beneath the key was a letter. Its seal was the same cracked shackle. "My sons," it began, the ink spidered and fading. "You were born for one purpose alone, to continue our ancient vigil. Beneath this house lies the vault. Within the vault, the shackles. Should they break, the Devourer will awaken. Should he awaken, there shall be no world left to guard. Forgive me, for there is no forgiveness, only duty. The vault awaits." A tremor ran through the house as they finished reading. Dust fell from the rafters like slow gray rain. Somewhere deep below, the earth groaned, a sound like a vast beast shifting in its sleep. Dmitri snorted, kicking the side of the coffin hard enough that the pine cracked, releasing a sour stench of decay. "Our beloved father, always the dramatist," he sneered. "Guardians of the apocalypse. And what, pray tell, is chained down there? Fairy tales and dust?" Ivan said nothing, but his jaw tightened. His fingers flexed at his sides, fists clenching and unclenching. Alexei moved towards the fireplace, where an ancient iron ring was set into the stone floor. Without hesitation, he drove the key into a hidden slot beside it. There was a grinding of gears, a shriek of rusted metal. The hearth groaned, then slowly, ponderously, began to slide aside, revealing a black stair spiraling down into the bowels of the earth. A wind blew up from the pit, a cold that was not merely temperature but intent. It crawled over their skin, worming into their blood, and the house seemed to sigh in relief as the vault opened once more. The brothers exchanged a look. No words were necessary. The chain of duty wound around each of them, just as it had bound their father, and his father before him. Torch in hand, Alexei descended first, the darkness swallowing him hungrily. Dmitri followed, laughing hollowly to mask the fear curdling in his gut. Ivan brought up the rear, silent as a grave. The stairs spiraled down far beyond the foundation of the house, into a stone tunnel carved with blasphemous sigils and ancient prayers scratched by desperate, bloody hands. The walls sweated, the stones whispering obscenities in languages long dead. At the tunnel's end was the vault. It was a cathedral-sized chamber, hewn from black basalt, lit only by the baleful glow of 7 great shackles embedded into a monstrous slab of stone at its center. Each shackle was the size of a carriage wheel, forged of something not entirely metal nor flesh, pulsing faintly like a dying heartbeat. The ground around the slab was cracked and scorched, blackened by something that had long ago tried to burn its way free. Alexei approached reverently, kneeling before the slab. Dmitri hung back, arms crossed defiantly. Ivan stood midway between them, eyes darting, analyzing. On the slab itself, faint beneath the surface of the rock, something stirred. A vast clawed hand pressed against the stone from within. Not dead, not alive, but dreaming in hunger. Suddenly, without warning, Dmitri laughed. Loud, mocking. "And we are to guard this forever? A tomb built of superstition and lies?" He spat on the stone. The reaction was immediate. The shackles screamed, a high, glass-shattering wail that blasted through the chamber, slamming the brothers to the ground. Alexei clutched his ears, feeling blood trickle down his neck. Dmitri howled in pain as the skin of his palm blistered where it had touched the slab. From the ceiling, something fell with a wet smack. A mass of blackened, pulsating flesh, roughly the size of a human heart, but covered in writhing, feather-thin tendrils. It twitched, then leapt, impossibly fast, onto Dmitri's shoulder. He screamed as it burrowed into his flesh, teeth sinking through skin and muscle with a sickening crunch. Blood sprayed across the floor in great, hot gouts. Dmitri clawed at his own body, tearing strips of his coat and skin away as he tried to rip the thing free, as focused on the iron grip on his heart. Ivan, acting on pure instinct, grabbed an ancient dagger from an altar and drove it into Dmitri's shoulder with brutal force. The parasite shrieked, a noise that tore at the soul and dissolved into oily smoke. Dmitri collapsed, gasping, his blood pooling around him. Silence fell, broken only by the slow, wet drip of blood onto stone. Alexei rose shakily to his feet, wiping the gore from his face. His eyes, when he turned to the others, were filled with something terrible, not fear, but acceptance. "The chains are weakening," he said, voice hoarse. "We are already too late." Above them, faint but growing louder, the house groaned again, and something laughed in the darkness. Chapter 2. The First Crack. The storm had arrived with unnatural speed. By the time the brothers hauled Dmitri's bleeding body back up the endless stairs, the world beyond the estate had been swallowed by a wall of black clouds. Thunder cracked the sky open in jagged wounds of light. Rain battered the earth with the force of thrown stones, each droplet stinging like a lash. The estate itself seemed to hunch against the storm, its crooked spires bending inward as if trying to protect some final secret. Every window rattled in its frame. The walls wept black water from ancient fissures. Somewhere deep within the bowels of the house, a sound like slow grinding stone echoed, rhythmic, patient. The vault was awake. They laid Dimitri on the dining table, shoving aside the mummified remains of a long-dead feast. Rotting platters, maggot-riddled meats, and tarnished goblets crashed to the floor as Ivan cleared the surface with violent efficiency. The smell was unbearable, sickly sweet and acrid, like spoiled wine and burnt hair. Dimitri whimpered as Alexei peeled away the shredded remains of his coat, revealing the wound, a savage, circular crater in his shoulder where the parasite had burrowed deep. The flesh around it was blackened and bubbling, strange root-like veins crawling outward in an obscene web beneath his skin. Ivan pressed a heavy iron crucifix against the wound. Dimitri screamed, a raw, animal sound as smoke hissed from the contact point. The stink of seared meat filled the air. "He'll die if we don't stop it," Ivan said coldly, his hands steady even as his own gut twisted in revulsion. "You might die anyway." Dimitri, barely conscious, managed a broken laugh. "If only I had your bedside manner." Alexei worked feverishly, muttering prayers under his breath as he smeared a thick, pungent salve made from old family recipes across the wound. Dimitri bucked against the table, muscles spasming violently. For a moment it seemed he would tear free entirely until Alexei, in desperation, pinned his brother down with both hands and invoked the old words. Not Russian, not even human. Language of the vault. The black veins retreated slowly, the wound knitting together into a puckered, angry scar. Dimitri collapsed into unconsciousness, his chest rising and falling in shallow, ragged breaths. Outside, the storm's fury redoubled. The thunder sounded less like weather and more like great, heavy footsteps striding across the heavens. Ivan turned from the table, wiping blood onto his coat with mechanical detachment. His eyes were hollow, calculating. "This is no simple madness," he said. "The vault is not myth. It is alive." Alexei nodded grimly, wiping sweat and blood from his brow. "It sleeps, but it dreams of freedom, and we are the only thing between it and the end." They sat in heavy silence, broken only by Dimitri's rattling breath and the steady drumming of rain. The house moaned again, louder now, accompanied by the sharp, brittle sound of cracking stone. Step from below. They raced back to the vault, torches guttering in the wind that somehow now blew from the depths. The descent seemed longer this time, the stairs twisting in impossible angles, the walls seeming to pulse with each heartbeat. When they entered the vault, a terrible sight greeted them. One of the 7 shackles, the 4th, a massive hoop of obsidian black iron, had split straight through. The 2 halves lay crumbled on the ground, sizzling and smoking as if burned from within. Worse still was the slab. The creature imprisoned inside, the Devourer, was no longer dormant. Beneath the translucent stone, its massive form shifted and writhed, an indistinct silhouette, neither beast nor god, but something infinitely worse. Vast arms, knotted with muscles and thorns, clawed against the underside. Eyes, too many, too large, rolled beneath the surface, blind yet knowing. And now, from the crack in the slab, a black mist was leaking, sluggish at first, then faster, seeping into the soil like poison into a wound. Alexei fell to his knees in horror. Ivan simply stood, frozen, fists clenched so tightly the knuckles went bone white. There were shapes, moving in the mist. Forms that looked human, at first glance. Women in tattered dresses, men in soldiers' uniforms from wars long dead, children dragging broken toys behind them. Their faces were wrong, twisted, teeth too long, eyes bleeding shadows. They moved without walking, gliding across the stone floor toward the brothers. Alexei snatched up the old dagger from the altar, the same blade Ivan had used to save Dmitri, and readied himself. Ivan picked up a rusted chain from the wall, wrapping it around his fists. The first of the specters lunged, mouth gaping in an impossible scream that rattled Alexei's bones. He met it with the dagger, slashing through mist and bone alike. The blade connected with a sickening crunch, and the figure exploded into a shower of black Eiram that burned where it landed. Ivan fought beside him, swinging the chain in brutal arcs. Each impact shattered the specters into shrieking clouds of ash, but they came by the dozens, endless and hungry. One caught Alexei by the leg, dragging him down. Teeth sank into his calf, tearing flesh with savage, mindless ferocity. He screamed, hacking wildly at the creature until it dissolved. Ivan was bleeding from a gash across his forehead, one eye swelling shut, but he fought on, relentless. But it was not enough. The mist thickened, the creatures multiplying faster than they could kill them. The vault itself groaned and cracked, the temperature plummeting to a deadly chill. At the far end of the chamber, a figure emerged from the heart of the mist, something larger, more solid, a towering shape with antlers of broken bone, a body stitched together from the remnants of every creature that had died trying to contain the Devourer. It raised a hand, and the specters froze, their howls silenced at once. The thing spoke, not with words, but with a resonance that shook Alexei's very soul. The shackles break, the feast begins. The ground heaved, throwing the brothers against the walls. The altar split in half with a deafening crack. Alexei clutched the dagger, barely able to rise. Ivan stumbled to him, dragging Dmitri, barely conscious, coughing blood behind him. There was only one choice: escape. Live long enough to find a way to reforge the shackles. Live long enough to resist the end. They fled up the stairs, the mist reaching after them like grasping hands, the laughter of the Devourer echoing in their ears, shaking the world itself. Behind them, in the vault, the second shackle began to fracture. The first crack was only the beginning. Chapter 3. Doubt and Temptation. The house had changed. As the brothers staggered back into the grand hall, it was no longer the decrepit mausoleum of memories they had entered days ago. The walls pulsed, breathing with a rhythm that matched the distant, monstrous heartbeat rising from the vault. Black mold spread across the ceiling in veiny webs, dripping tendrils of slime that hissed when they touched the floor. The paintings, proud portraits of long-dead Karamazovs, had twisted into grotesque parodies, faces melting, mouths stretching wide in silent, endless screams. Alexei slammed the great iron door to the stairwell shut and bolted it with a length of broken timber. It wouldn't hold, not if the thing below truly wanted out, but the action gave him the illusion of control. Ivan dropped Dmitri unceremoniously onto a moth-eaten couch. His brother groaned, blood staining the cushions in dark, irregular blotches. Lightning forked across the sky, casting the ruined hall in a flash of corpse light. Thunder rolled so close it felt as though the heavens themselves were collapsing. Alexei paced, whispering fragments of prayers, the old invocations clawing their way from the depths of memory. His fingers danced over the symbols carved into the hilt of the dagger, warding marks, the last pitiful defenses against something that could not be named. Ivan, however, said nothing. He stood staring at the sealed stairwell, jaw tight, a tremor running through his hands. His mind worked furiously, calculating, doubting. The seal was broken. The world was ending, and he, logical, rational Ivan, was trapped inside a rotting tomb with fairy tales made flesh. This cannot be real, part of him still insisted. But the stink of blood in his nostrils, the deep ache in his battered body, the shifting whispers slithering up from the vault, they told another story. Dmitri stirred, muttering curses under his breath, his eyes bloodshot and fevered. His skin had taken on a sickly yellow-gray tint. Infection. or something worse. As Alexei tended to him, Ivan slipped away. He moved through the twisting corridors like a wraith, drawn deeper into the house's malign belly. The air grew colder with each step, until his breath misted before him in thick, ragged clouds. The floorboards creaked underfoot, but there was no echo. The house swallowed every sound. He found himself in the old chapel, a ruined place, long abandoned. The altar was split down the middle, and the stained-glass windows had been shattered, leaving jagged teeth of colored glass in their frames. The crucifix above the altar had been defiled, the figure of Christ twisted into something monstrous, its face flayed open to reveal a yawning void. Ivan sank to his knees, exhausted. Something stirred in the darkness beyond the broken altar. A voice, soft and silken, wound its way into his ear. "How many fight what you cannot defeat, Ivan Karamazov?" He jerked upright, scanning the room. But he was alone, physically. The voice coiled around him like smoke, sweet with poison. "You know the truth. The Devourer is inevitable. The world rots already. Your prayers are hollow, your sacrifices are wasted, but you can endure." A shadow formed against the ruined wall. It had no true shape, only the vague outline of a man, tall, regal, crowned with an invisible authority. Its eyes burned like black suns, drinking in the light. Ivan wanted to run, but something deeper, some black, wounded thing inside him, held him frozen. "Break the second shackle, Ivan. Free the first tongue of power. You will be spared the ruin that comes. You will become the architect of the new world." He pressed his fists against his skull, nails biting into his scalp. No, this is madness. The voice did not relent. "You already doubt. Your mind is cracked. I offer you meaning. I offer you peace. No more endless guardianship. No more inherited guilt. Only freedom." Ivan rose shakily to his feet. His hands moved without conscious thought, pulling open a hidden panel behind the altar, one he somehow knew would be there. Inside was a relic, a shard of one of the original shackles, forged before the vault itself was built. It throbbed with a malignant life of its own, veins of red light pulsing across its surface. He could end it. With this shard, he could shatter the next seal. He could hasten the inevitable and be spared the agony of fighting a battle already lost. He reached out. The moment his fingers brushed the shard, pain lashed through him, a white-hot spike driven through his spine. His knees buckled, and he hit the floor hard enough to split his lip. The shadow laughed, low and triumphant. From far away, Alexei's voice reached him, desperate, furious. "Ivan, where are you?" The spell broke. The shadow dissolved into mist. The shard clattered from Ivan's hands, leaving scorch marks across his palms. Gasping, he stumbled back toward the hall. He arrived just in time to see the first true casualty of the Devourer's escape. Dmitri, half-conscious and writhing in fever, had torn open his wound. Black veins spiderwebbed across his chest and neck. His eyes rolled back into his skull, and a low, guttural growl escaped his throat, a sound no human larynx could produce. Before Alexei could react, Dmitri lunged. Fingers curled into claws. He drove Alexei to the floor with savage strength. Blood sprang from the priest's mouth as his head struck the stone. Dmitri tore at his brother with feral fury, fingers raking deep furrows into Alexei's chest and throat. Alexei gurgled, tried to speak, but only blood bubbled from his lips. Ivan didn't think. He seized a rusted iron poker from the fireplace and charged. The first blow took Dmitri across the ribs, the impact cracking like a gunshot. Dmitri barely flinched. He turned, his face a mask of hatred and rot, and lunged. Ivan drove the poker straight through Dmitri's side, the metal sinking deep with a wet crunch. Dmitri shrieked, black blood vomiting from his mouth, but he did not fall. He grabbed Ivan's head with both hands, thumbs gouging toward Ivan's eyes. Alexei, coughing, managed to seize the dagger from where it had fallen. He drove it up into Dmitri's throat, the blade bursting out through the back of his neck in a shower of gore. Dmitri spasmed. For a moment he clung to both brothers, the strength of madness holding them in a bloody embrace. Then, slowly, he sagged, falling heavily to the ground. Silence, only the sound of rain and weeping. Alexei wept as he knelt over Dmitri's body, cradling it in his arms. Black blood stained his hands, seeping into his skin, into his very soul. Ivan stood apart, the poker clutched in blood-slicked fingers. He did not weep. He only stared at the corpse of his brother and at the broken world around him, and wondered whether, in the end, the voice had been right. Maybe the only escape from damnation was to embrace it. Behind them, deep in the house's belly, the second shackle began to splinter. The sound was very much like bone breaking, and somewhere far away, the devourer smiled. Chapter 4. Blood Among Brothers. The corpse of Dmitri Karamazov lay still for less than a minute. The silence that followed his death was thick, choked with the metallic tang of blood and the suffocating, rotten odor of the mists creeping in under the doors. Alexei rocked back and forth, his hands locked in rigor mortis around Dmitri's ruined body, the dagger still embedded in his brother's throat. Ivan remained standing, the poker slipping from his numb fingers with a dull clang against the stone floor. His mind was a maelstrom, grief, horror, calculation, and the whispering echoes of temptation. And then Dmitri moved. It was not a convulsion, nor the final tremor of a dying man. This was deliberate. His hand, streaked with coagulated black blood, seized Alexei's wrist. The dead man's eyes snapped open. They were no longer Dmitri's eyes. No hazel, no humanity, no flicker of madness or passion. Only two black voids, swirling with an abyssal hunger. Alexei screamed, a raw animal wail that echoed through the skeletal halls of the estate. Ivan reacted without thought. He snatched a rusted candelabrum from a shattered side table and hurled it with all his strength. It smashed into Dmitri's skull with a sickening crunch, folding his head at an impossible angle. Still, Dmitri did not release Alexei. Black ichor poured from the shattered cranium, bubbling and hissing where it touched the floor, eating into the stone like acid. Dmitri's body jerked and spasmed, his muscles flexing unnaturally, bones snapping audibly beneath his torn skin, his spine elongated, joints twisting backward, ribs punching through his ruined flesh like jagged fingers. A new shape was being born. Ivan grabbed Alexei by the shoulders and wrenched him away. The dagger, still buried in Dmitri's throat, tore free with a wet, tearing noise, releasing a geyser of fetid gore that sprayed across the walls and floor. They stumbled backward, choking on the stink. Before them, Dmitri's body convulsed into a nightmarish form, a creature stitched from human remains and something infinitely older. Bone jutted from its limbs like crude weapons. Its chest split open into a yawning maw, lined with serrated teeth, and its hands twisted into claws long enough to gut a man with a single swipe. It let out a sound, not a roar, not a shriek, but a low, wet gurgling, like the death rattle of 1,000 throats at once. And then it charged. The impact threw Ivan and Alexei apart, slamming them into opposite walls. Ivan felt something crack in his shoulder. Pain bloomed, sharp and searing. The beast lunged for Alexei first, its mouth splitting wider, saliva like molten tar dripping from its many teeth. Alexei rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the snapping jaws, and drove the dagger into the creature's ribcage with all the strength he could muster. The blade sank deep and stuck. The monster shrieked, the sound rupturing the air itself, causing plaster to rain from the ceiling. Ivan staggered to his feet, grabbing a broken chair leg as a makeshift club. He swung at the creature's head, the wood splintering on impact but knocking it sideways, just enough to give Alexei space to scramble free. The beast turned its wrath on Ivan, moving with unnatural speed. It backhanded him across the hall. Ivan crashed into the far wall with a bone-jarring slam. The air blasted from his lungs. Stars exploded behind his eyes. He tasted blood. Through the haze of agony, he saw Alexei rise, bloodied but determined. He moved toward the fireplace, where the iron poker still lay slick with gore. The beast advanced, dragging its broken body with a hideous, slithering grace. Its many mouths gibbered and whispered in a chorus of blasphemies. Alexei seized the poker and without hesitation plunged it into the burning hearth. The metal glowed red almost instantly, the flames hungrily wrapping around it. He turned, brandishing the flaming weapon like a holy relic. The creature paused. For the first time, it showed fear. Ivan, struggling to his knees, saw his chance. He began muttering the words carved into the dagger's hilt, mangling the ancient syllables through broken teeth. The creature lunged at Alexei, but Alexei met it mid-charge, driving the red-hot poker into the heart of its writhing, exposed chest cavity. "It's good for you." There was a sound like sizzling fat and splitting wood. The beast screamed, a sound so immense that the very stones of the estate seemed to tremble, and thrashed wildly, knocking over furniture, shattering windows, tearing long gouges in the walls. Alexei held firm, twisting the poker deeper. Ivan, with a final gasp, completed the incantation. The creature froze. Its body stiffened, muscles locking, mouths falling silent. Black blood poured from every orifice. The light dimmed, as though the house itself was holding its breath. And then, with a wet, final shudder, Dmitri's form collapsed inward, imploding into a puddle of foul, bubbling sludge. The smell was unbearable. Decay, rot, something far fouler than death itself. Alexei staggered back, dropping the poker with a clatter. His hands were blistered, burned raw. His eyes were hollow, rimmed with red. Ivan crawled to him, leaning against his brother's battered form for support. For long minutes neither spoke. They simply breathed, great, heaving gulps of rancid air, and tried not to weep. But the silence could not last. A sound drifted up from the broken stairwell, a distant grinding groan of stone upon stone. The second shackle was fracturing completely now, the final strands of its ancient magic snapping one by one. Alexei turned to Ivan, his voice a ragged whisper. "It has begun." Ivan wiped the blood from his mouth, his face a mask of exhaustion and grim determination. "No," he said, "this is just the opening act." Above them, the storm cracked open the heavens once more, and from the vault's depths came a sound like laughter, not human, not animal, but the laughter of something old and hungry, savoring the slow, inevitable end. The brothers Karamazov, bloodied and broken, knew there would be no salvation waiting for them at the end of this night. Only duty, and the taste of their own ruin. Chapter 5. In the Mouth of Madness. The estate was collapsing into madness. Every step Ivan and Alexei took through the ruinous halls brought new horrors. The architecture itself had begun to defy logic. Doors twisted into impossible shapes, corridors looped back on themselves, and staircases led into yawning pits of shadow. The house, once merely decaying, was now a living thing, animated by the dreamer's awakening hunger. The paintings on the walls bled from their frames, colors dripping onto the floor like thick arterial spray. Statues wept black tears, mirrors reflected scenes from other worlds. Worlds already consumed, their skies torn open, their lands drowned in blood and ash. Alexei stumbled as the floor shuddered underfoot. From the cracked tiles, hands burst upward, gaunt, skeletal hands, clutching at their ankles. The brothers fought them off desperately, Alexei battering them with the haft of the broken poker, Ivan kicking and stomping with savage, mindless fury. The hands writhed and clawed, even as they were shattered, skeletal fingers trying to reassemble themselves, dragging up twisted bodies of bone and sinew, stitched together by the black mist that poured from the vault. "Velan Nastavich, we must reach the study," Ivan bellowed over the cacophony. It was the only place left untouched, so far, their father's private sanctum, sealed by rites older than the house itself. It was there, he remembered, that the old bastard had hidden the tome, a book bound in human leather, written in blood, containing the last desperate rites of the Karamazov bloodline, the rites to mend the shackles. They fought their way forward, through the nightmare, every step a battle. In the great hall, spectral beasts roamed, wolves with faces of men, their spines broken and jutting through their flesh like spears. One lunged at Ivan, jaws clamping onto his forearm. Bone crunched, and Ivan howled, driving the broken leg of a chair deep into the creature's eye socket. It burst into a foul mist, the stench of rotting meat overwhelming. Another nearly took Alexei, dragging him to the floor, claws tearing into his thighs. He plunged the still scorching poker into its belly, and it writhed and spasmed, vomiting streams of wriggling black worms before dissolving into ash. At last they burst into the study, slamming the thick oak door behind them. Inside, it was blessedly still. The air smelled of dust and old parchment, the walls lined with towering shelves of ancient tomes. Heavy drapes were drawn across the windows, muting the lightning flashes outside. A fireplace crackled weakly, casting flickering shadows. And there, atop the massive desk, was the book. It seemed to breathe, the cover pulsing faintly. A mouth stitched shut with iron wire marred its surface, as though the tome itself screamed in silence. Alexei approached first, reverently. He peeled the heavy book open. The pages writhed beneath his touch, shifting into new configurations, symbols twisting and slithering across the vellum as though resisting being read. But the brothers had been trained since birth for this. Alexei's fingers traced the words, and he began to read aloud in a language that tasted like rust and ashes. Ivan, cradling his mangled arm, stood watch. His blood soaked into the floorboards, and he could feel the house hungrily drinking it in. The walls seemed to shudder in pleasure with each crimson drop. As Alexei read, the fire sputtered and grew, throwing mad shadows. Candles mounted on the shelves burst into green, unholy flames. A presence filled the room, thick, suffocating. It pressed against their skulls, a vast mind brushing against theirs like a leviathan stirring in a black sea. Who dares disturb the feast? The voice came from the hearth, the mouth of the flame itself. Ivan gritted his teeth. "We are Karamazovs. We bind you, we chain you." The flame twisted into a face. Not human, but almost. A mockery of their bloodline. A parody of their father's cruel sneer and hollow eyes. "You are nothing, dust and broken promises. I will devour your line and dance upon your ashes." Alexei shouted over it, forcing the ancient words into the air, driving them like nails into reality. The study trembled. Books tumbled from the shelves. The stitched mouth on the book's cover twisted open, revealing a black pit lined with tiny teeth. From it, a single line of light lashed out, carving burning sigils into the floor around them. A ritual circle. The house howled in rage, the walls splitting open to reveal the writhing black mist beyond. From the gaps poured creatures, limbs akimbo, faces melted into screaming masks. Ivan tore down a heavy tapestry and set it ablaze, using the fire as a wall between them and the advancing horrors. Alexei's voice rose to a crescendo, his throat bleeding from the strain. The light from the ritual circle brightened, burning away the mist, searing the monsters to cinders where they stood. For a moment, A single agonized moment. It seemed to be working. The estate groaned, the ground splitting in jagged cracks. The mist recoiled, shrieking. But then the final line of the ritual was revealed. Ivan saw it at the same time Alexei did. Blood. Karamazov blood, freely given, willingly offered. A sacrifice. One brother had to die to reforge the chains. Alexei's voice broke. His hands fell to his sides, trembling. Ivan met his brother's eyes. Or a heartbeat. Neither moved. The house around them was crumbling, the vault's heartbeat now a deafening roar in their ears. The mist pressed against the circle like an ocean against glass, moments from shattering it. Alexei stepped forward. "I will do it," he said, voice raw but steady. "It is the only way." Ivan opened his mouth to protest, but he saw the resolve there, and he knew there could be no stopping it. Alexei drew the ancient dagger from his belt, its blade still blackened from Dmitri's death. He placed the point against his own chest, just above the heart, and he smiled. A sad, broken smile. "For our family, for the world." Ivan lunged to stop him, but Alexei was faster. The dagger plunged inward with a sickening shwook. Alexei gasped, blood bubbling from his lips, and fell forward onto the ritual circle. His blood flooded the sigils, each one igniting in brilliant, blinding light. The circle flared, expanding outward in a blast of pure force. The mist screamed. The creatures shriveled into ash. The vault shuddered, and a second shackle froze mid-fracture, the cracks sealing with the sound of grinding metal. Alexei's body convulsed once, twice, then lay still, his blood continuing to spill outward in a slow, steady pool. Ivan fell to his knees beside his brother, cradling the broken body in his arms. He did not weep. He could not. The Devourer was not defeated, only delayed, and Ivan knew that the true cost had only just begun. Far below, deep within the vault, the Devourer stirred anew, its hunger undiminished, its patience ended. The feast had merely been postponed. Chapter 6. The circle of light guttered and died. The brief triumph bought with Alexei's life unraveled before Ivan's eyes, as though reality itself had only been holding its breath, waiting for the sacrifice to be spent. The house shook violently. Great cracks split the stone beneath him, ripping through the floorboards, devouring entire wings of the estate into a bottomless black void. Distant walls collapsed with a deafening roar. The entire Karamazov legacy crumbled into dust and ash. Ivan knelt over Alexei's corpse, the dagger still embedded deep in his brother's chest. His blood ran in thick, steaming rivulets, soaking into the desecrated floor, staining Ivan's hands up to the wrists. He touched Alexei's face, the warmth already fading. "You were the last good thing," Ivan whispered hoarsely. "The last damn thing." But there was no time to grieve. From every shattered doorway the mist seeped inward again, cautious at first, wary of the magic that had just burned it back. But it sensed the weakening of the circle, the vulnerability in Ivan's soul, and it came on faster, like the floodwaters of a breached dam. Ivan staggered to his feet. Alexei's sacrifice had slowed the vault's collapse, but it had not stopped it. The second shackle, though briefly sealed, had been left brittle. Hairline fractures radiated out like veins across its surface. With time, mere hours, perhaps less, it would shatter completely. And when it did, the world would end screaming. Alexei had died in vain, unless Ivan could finish what their ancestors started. He had to find a way to permanently repair the bindings, or forge new ones. But the book was no help now. Its pages had blackened and curled into ash. The final lines burned out of existence when Alexei's blood had fed it. There was only one path left. The tongues. Yavon remembered the whispered warnings passed down through generations. Warnings even their mad father had feared to speak aloud. Locked away beneath the estate were the tongues, pieces of the Devourer's will, imprisoned separately, used once before to bind it. To harness them was to invite madness. To speak their language was to carve your soul open and let something ancient nest inside. But Ivan no longer cared. If the choice was between obliteration and damnation, then he would choose damnation and fight tooth and claw from within it. With Alexa's body still at his feet, Ivan tore the heavy crucifix from the study wall and armed himself with it, feeling the ancient iron hum in his battered hands. It would be useless against the Devourer itself, but it would serve against whatever horrors lay between him and the vault. He plunged back into the rotting heart of the estate. The house was a full nightmare now. Ceilings wept rivers of blood. The portraits of the ancestors had torn themselves from the walls, staggering through the corridors, their mouths sewn shut, their eyes gouged out. They clawed blindly at Ivan as he passed, whispering desperate prayers from lipless mouths. He crushed them with brutal, remorseless strikes, feeling bones shatter under the crucifix's heavy blows. Gore splattered the walls and ceiling, the stench of old death thick enough to choke on. Still he pushed forward. In the ballroom, the chandeliers had become nooses, and from each hung malformed bodies, Karamazovs of ages past, their legs twitching, their heads grotesquely swollen and pulsating with black fluid. The floor was a sea of twitching hands, fingers grasping, pulling, trying to drag him under. One caught his ankle. Ivan smashed its wrist with a savage kick, bones exploding outward like shattered glass. He waded through them, hacking and swinging without pause, until his arms burned and his vision blurred. At last he reached the grand staircase leading downward into the forgotten crypts beneath the vault. The mist grew thicker here, dense and heavy, filling his lungs with the taste of grave dirt and iron. Each step downward was a battle against gravity itself, the stairwell spiraling into an abyss of whispering shadows. At the bottom, a titanic door loomed, carved with hideous reliefs, scenes of the first binding, when the Devourer had been chained by the desperate ancestors who had traded their humanity for power. Their faces had been twisted in agony and ecstasy. Ivan pressed his bloody palm to the center of the door, where the family crest, the shattered shackle, was inlaid. His blood soaked into the cracks, and the door shuddered. With a grinding, screaming moan, it split open, revealing the Chamber of Tongues. It was worse than the legends had ever described. The chamber stretched impossibly wide, a cavern carved from flesh and stone fused together. Pulsing veins crisscrossed the walls and ceiling. Tumors sprouted from the ground like obscene fungi. The air was thick with the stench of rot, acid, and despair. And in the center of the chamber floated the tongues, 5 bloated masses of black meat, each inscribed with glowing runes, each quivering as if alive, suspended in the air by invisible chains. Ivan stepped forward. The tongues stirred. The runes ignited, casting a blinding blood-red light across the chamber. Who speaks? Who dares? Who please? The voices battered against Ivan's mind like iron hammers, fracturing his thoughts, driving barbed hooks into his memories and yanking them apart. He fell to his knees, blood pouring from his nose, his ears, his eyes. He forced himself up, staggering. "I am Ivan Karamazov," he rasped, his voice barely audible against the storm of screams. "I am the last. I will bind you again." The tongues laughed, not with joy, not with cruelty. It was hunger. They knew what he was offering, his body, his mind, his very soul, as the vessel for their power. One of the tongues detached from the cluster, drifting toward him like a grotesque balloon. Tendrils slithered from it, wrapping around his arms, his chest, his throat. Pain. White-hot, searing. The tendrils burrowed into his flesh, threading through his veins, his bones, knitting him into the living tapestry of the Devourer's prison. Ivan screamed, and the chamber screamed with him. As the tongue fused to his body, his mind split into 1,000 jagged shards. He saw visions, the world drowning in oceans of black fire, cities screaming as they were turned inside out, the stars themselves being devoured by a vast, grinning maw. But he also saw the chains reforged. He saw the vault sealed anew, the Devourer thrust back into its eternal slumber. Through the pain, through the madness, Ivan held on to one thought: I will not let this world die. The other tongues slithered toward him now, drawn by the first. They wrapped around his legs, his spine, his heart. Each one would cost more. Each one would take a piece of him that could never be reclaimed. He embraced them. In the final moments before the last tongue fused into his skull, Ivan Karamazov looked upward through the fissured earth, through the burning, dying house, and whispered a prayer not to any god, but to the ruined memory of his brother. Forgive me, Alex. Then the tongues swallowed him whole, and Ivan Karamazov, the last of his line, ceased to exist in any way that could be understood by mortal men. Only the Keeper remained, and far, far above, in the ruins of the world, the mist recoiled. Chapter 7. The Broken and the Bound. The transformation was agony. Ilvain's body convulsed on the blood-slicked floor of the Chamber of Tongues, writhing in spasms so violent that his bones snapped and realigned with sickening cracks. His flesh stretched and tore, knitting back together along patterns the human eye could barely comprehend, symbols of binding, of slavery, of eternal imprisonment. Each pulse of the tongues inside him burned away another fragment of who he had been. His mind was a shattered mirror, each shard reflecting a different reality. A boy playing chess with his father, a young man debating theology, a soldier standing over his first kill, a brother weeping over the grave of another. The tongues devoured the reflections one by one, and yet some spark of Ivan's iron will refused to extinguish. Through the inferno of pain he gripped the purpose he had been forged for, the ancient oath branded onto the Karamazov bloodline: to bind the Devourer, to endure, no matter the cost. The Chamber of Tongues shuddered. The vault above, the great stone sarcophagus where the Devourer twisted and festered, roared with awakening hunger, a sound that split the earth and boiled the mist into shrieking steam. The second shackle, so near to breaking, now hesitated. Ivan rose to his feet, or rather, something that had once been Ivan rose. His body was grotesque now, carved with living runes, veins pulsating with molten red light, eyes blackened and dripping trails of smoke. His heart beat a hollow, thunderous rhythm that synchronized with the failing shackles. The tongues whispered in his skull, 1,000 voices clamoring for freedom, destruction, oblivion. He crushed them with a thought. He was the Keeper now, and he had work to do. Ivan staggered forward through the collapsing corridors of the estate, his bare feet splashing through rivers of blood and bile. He left smoldering footprints where he stepped, the very walls recoiling from his presence. The mist drew back in terror, unwilling to touch the cursed flesh he had become. In the shattered great hall, the full horror of the estate's demise was laid bare. The estate's roof had been torn open, exposing the sky, a sky that no longer belonged to Earth. Swirling clouds of black flame churned overhead, and in their depths, vast shapes moved, blind titans, serpents of infinite hunger, laughing stars burning out one by one. The end had already begun. The townspeople, those who had once lived in the shadow of the Karamazov estate, had been drawn here like moths to a flame. Their bodies hung in the courtyard, twisted into obscene sculptures, limbs fused together, faces stretched into rictuses of ecstasy and agony. Still alive, still screaming. Ivan barely noticed. His eyes were fixed on the vault entrance. The great iron door had been torn off its hinges. The vault now gaped open like a festering wound, bleeding mist and madness into the world. And there, at its heart, the Devourer strained against its bonds. Even half seen, the creature defied understanding. Its form was fluid, impossible. A mouth that stretched across dimensions. A body stitched from the flesh of dead gods. A mind like a collapsing black hole. It exhaled, and worlds died in silence. The second shackle cracked again, a long, mournful groan like the death knell of the universe. Even moved. He raised his arms, and the tongues inside him howled in protest. They raked his nerves raw, tried to seize control, to turn him into a puppet of the thing that slept below. He tore their influence from his mind with raw, brutal willpower, blood streaming from his ears, his nose, his ruptured eyes. "I bind you!" Ivan roared, the words rippling through the broken world like cannon fire. The ground split open at his feet, revealing the hidden reservoirs of ancient magic buried beneath the estate. Rivers of pure light gushed upward, wrapping around his mutilated body, feeding his final working. The Devourer turned its vast, blind gaze toward him. It spoke without words, a promise of agony, a future of endless feasting, a vision of Ivan's body stretched across the stars, screaming for a mercy that would never come. Human answered with another word of binding. Chains of fire erupted from the earth, latching onto the Devourer's writhing form. The creature shrieked, a sound that shattered the last remnants of the surrounding land, flattening forests, leveling mountains, drying oceans into cracked beds of dust. The second shackle, battered to the brink of annihilation, held, just barely, reforged by Ivan's defiled soul. But the price was monstrous. The rivers of light poured into Ivan, burning away the last shreds of humanity from his form. His bones blackened, his skin hardened into a carapace inscribed with moving, seething runes, his face twisted into a permanent grimace of pain and wrath. He became a living shackle, a living prison. The chains that bound the Devourer were now anchored through him. The Devourer, still slavering, still laughing, withdrew into its nightmare slumber, beaten back, but not destroyed. The mist dispersed, retreating like a wounded animal into the deep places of the world. The shattered sky healed, though the stars looked forever wrong. Slightly dimmer, slightly further away. Silence fell over the estate, what little remained of it. Ivan stood alone among the ruins, a monument to sacrifice and despair. He could not move far from the vault now. He was its linchpin, its gatekeeper, its eternal prisoner. Every heartbeat was a lash of agony. Every breath was a reminder that he would never leave, never rest, never die. He was chained not by duty now, but by his own body, his own soul. The cost of salvation. In the final moments before the storm clouds dispersed and the first weak rays of sunlight clawed through the ash-choked air, Ivan remembered Alexei's face. Peaceful, smiling, untouched by the filth of the world. And he wept dry, broken sobs that the earth itself seemed to echo. Far, far below, the Devourer shifted in its slumber, not defeated, only waiting. Chapter 8. Ashes of Duty. The Karamazov estate was gone. Where once had stood a fortress of stone and pride, Now only a pit remained, vast and charred, surrounded by splinters of scorched earth and the blackened skeletons of trees. A wound, carved into the world, festering beneath a bruised and broken sky. The mist had fled, but its mark lingered. Nothing grew here. The soil was dead. The air tasted of iron and old blood. Animals avoided the ruins. Even the crows dared not fly above the shattered ground. At the pit's heart, Ivan Karamazov still stood. Or what had once been Ivan. He was fused to the earth now, anchored by tendrils of blackened flesh and molten stone that wrapped around his legs, chest, and arms like parasitic vines. His spine was fused into a jagged monolith that had erupted from the soil, a towering slab of cracked obsidian engraved with living, writhing symbols. His body had ossified into something grotesque, half man, half monument. He could not move. He could barely think. Only the endless, grinding pain remained, and the pulse of the vault far beneath him, hammering through his ruined body like a second heartbeat. Each beat a reminder. The devourer sleeps because you suffer. Time lost all meaning. The sun rose and fell without notice. Seasons changed in distant lands. Wars were fought and forgotten. Kings and tyrants rose and fell, and still Ivan endured. A relic hidden in a place the world had chosen to forget. The memories became ghosts. He saw Alexei sometimes, in the flickering corners of his withered mind, smiling sadly, reaching out a hand he could never grasp. He saw Dmitri too, not as he had been, but as the thing he had become, broken and enslaved by the vault's corruption. He spoke to them sometimes, muttered apologies, bargains, prayers. No answers came. The years became centuries. Moss crept up the sides of the monolith. Rain battered his featureless face, eroding the last remnants of humanity from his petrified features. Lightning struck the pit again and again, as though the heavens themselves sought to erase his existence. Nothing could destroy him. He was bound too deeply now. He was the final shackle. And still, the devourer stirred. At first, it was only in dreams, or what passed for dreaming within the prison of stone and flesh. Vast, impossible visions filled his mind. Planets torn in half like ripe fruit, seas boiling into steam, cities collapsing into singularities. He saw it all in hideous clarity, each horror accompanied by the devourer's low, rumbling laughter. The laughter grew louder with each passing decade. Worse still were the visitors. Drawn by old rumors, by half-remembered warnings, by the invisible psychic howl that radiated from the pit, seekers came. Scholars and fools, cultists and soldiers, priests with cracked crosses, and madmen with tongues blackened by forbidden knowledge. They descended into the ruins, armed with torches and ambition. They found the monolith, and they heard it whisper. Ivan's prison, the runes carved into his flesh and bone, spoke to them, promising power, freedom, salvation. It lied. The first to approach was a priest, his robe tattered, his eyes burning with fanatical zeal. He fell to his knees before Ivan's blackened form and began to pray. Ivan tried to scream, to warn him, but his voice had been silenced long ago. The priest placed his hands upon the monolith. Instantly, his flesh blistered and burst, peeling away like wax near a flame. His bones shattered inward, sucked into the stone with a wet slurp. His body folded and collapsed, shriveled into a stain of ash and gristle. The monolith pulsed. The vault sighed in contentment. More came. More died. Some begged, some demanded, some tried to break the chains, foolishly believing they could control what lay beneath. Each time they touched the monolith, Ivan felt a fresh spike of agony lance through his soul, a renewal of the binding. Each sacrifice strengthened the prison, but at a terrible cost. The vault fed on them, on their hope, lost their despair, and on Ivan's endless guilt. One winter, long after even the memory of the Karamazov name had been buried beneath layers of dust and lies, a girl came, no more than 12 years old, alone, shivering in the snow. She knelt before the monolith and wept, not for herself, but for the world. Ivan felt her tears strike the stone, felt her prayers, pure, untainted, seep into the ancient rune. And for the first time in what could have been 1,000 years, something inside him stirred that was not pain. He remembered Alexei Sakov, Dmitri's fall, his own defiance. He remembered why he had chosen this fate. The girl rose and fled before the vault's hunger could snare her, her small footprints the only mark upon the frozen ground. And Ivan, frozen and broken, smiled a slow, cracking smile. The world still fought. Somewhere, beyond the reach of the mist and madness, life endured. Whoever it was enough. There to be. Below, in the endless black labyrinths of the vault, the devourer twitched in its sleep. Its hunger would never die. Its patience was endless. But as long as Ivan remained, as long as his cursed, mutilated soul clung to the ruins of his body, it would not feast. Not yet. Not today. The final sentinel stood watch in a world that no longer remembered him, bound in flesh, chained in stone, doomed to endure. And far above, in the starlit heavens, something vast and ancient turned its blind gaze once more toward the earth, and whispered through the void, "It's an